All right, guys, if you're out there transacting right now, it's May 2025. You can probably attest to this. The market is kind of funky right now, right? It's all over the place, right? We got rates going up and down every week, right? We
stock
got
market
tariffs,
going up and down.
stock market, Trump saying stuff, it's pretty crazy right now. And that's obviously affecting buyers and sellers decision making right now, right? So we wanted to just drop a quick video and give you guys some insight on how you can have more success during this time when working with buyers and sellers. A few things that we're doing and we're coaching our agents on that I think will allow you to get more buyers and sellers across the finish line, right?
Absolutely.
So let's just kick it off. Let's dive right into it. If you're working with buyers right now, what's the reality right now with buyers? What are we seeing? What are the challenges when working with buyers in today's market?
Yeah, so I mean, what we're seeing right now is one is going to be, just their down payment, right? We kind of discussed this in our meeting, but with the down payment, a lot of people don't want to pull their money out of the stocks right now.
Yeah.
Right? Which is totally understood. So what I'm coaching our agents is this is a great opportunity for the buyers to leverage the minimum down payment programs. Right? The 3, the 5, the 10% programs, not having to put the 20% down by liquidating their stock. So if you utilize just a minimum down payment, obviously your monthly payment may be a little higher, but once the stocks rebound, that's a great opportunity to refinance, cash out your stock, and pay down the principal balance. Right? So it gives you an opportunity as a buyer to participate in the market right now, right? To take advantage of the inventory that we have, and then also, to go ahead and start growing equity within your property. Right. That's what we're coaching our agents on the finance side.
And that's a big thing, right? And to expand on that a little bit, is the main hurdle for people is affordability, right? When rates go up, their buying power goes down. When the stock market drops out here in the Bay Area, a lot of people have their money in stock, right? They're getting RSUs from their company, tech companies and stuff like that. And so I think that's a great way to be creative and think outside the box and say, hey, Mr. Buyer, we realize the stocks are down, so let's not pull out 20% down payment. Let's only pull out 5 and get your foot in the door and take advantage of all this extra inventory that's out there right now. Right?
Exactly. And again, what you also position yourself is that the norm, everyone or a lot of people are holding off. Right? So how does that create that opportunity for you as a buyer is that there may be less competition. Right. So now, if you're thinking outside the box, you have less competition. That means you can negotiate more with these sellers and, possibly get, credit for your closing costs, to pay your closing costs or pay, get money to buy down the interest rate. Right. To save money on that monthly payment.
And that's a huge one, right? That leads into the next one is negotiating credits, right? We're doing that on like 90% of our deals right now, right? And so if you're not advising your buyers or letting them know that there's a way you can negotiate credits, or let's just put that in the offer and try to get a rate buy down or a credit, for closing costs. I think you're missing an opportunity right now, right? Because sellers who are on the market, they're serious about selling, right? If they're on the market right now despite the economy and all that, that means they want to sell. And oftentimes what we're noticing is sellers are willing to entertain the credits.
Definitely,
right?
Definitely, they're willing. And this is what I kind of coach the agents is that, as a buyer and a buyer's agent, you guys want to buy, and as a seller and a seller agent, they want to sell. So our role is to try to make a deal that's a win-win for both parties, right? A win-win for your buyer, a win-win for your seller. And I think if you go into it with that mindset, not just like, oh, they're not going to give us credit if we ask. No, we don't know. We don't know their situation, and they may need the funds to close because maybe they're buying a new property, maybe they're buying a new build, and they have to close at a certain time. Right? We don't know this until we start negotiating and trying to make it a win-win for both parties.
And that goes into something you just said. Maybe the seller has another transaction, right? You won't know that if you don't ask, right? So if you're a buyer agent, you need to be asking the listing agent, hey, as much information as possible. Hey, what can I do to make this a win-win? Hey, is your buyer buying another property, right? We can't play by these rules that don't exist, right? If I'm representing the buyer, I'm trying to get as much information so that I can structure my offer in the best way that's going to make sense for them. Right?
Absolutely. And I think that's key is that, you've been on the listing side quite a bit, Enrique, and you've noticed that some agents will just send in their offer. They won't give you a call. They won't follow up on the offer. So I think, at this point, what we coach and teach our agents as a buyer agent is make sure you're going above and beyond. Make sure you're reaching out to the listing agent. make sure that you have your lender reach out to the listing agent.
Yeah.
Gather as much information so that you can structure your offer so it has the highest chance of getting accepted and negotiating the best terms for your buyer and making the deal happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Do not be one of those agents that just sends an offer without ever having contacted the listing agent first. I see it all the time, and I'm like, dude, how did you get your license, right? Like,
Yeah.
you need to call the listing agent. You need to have a dialogue first to find out what the expectations
Yes.
are. You know, what can you do to make it a win-win? If you're not doing that, you're doing a huge disservice to your buyer.
Yeah.
Because that ammunition right there, that information can be the key to making that offer work.
Yeah,
right?
because a lot of times it's those small things, right? You've taken it this far of showing property, went over disclosures, inspections, wrote the offer, but you need to go ahead and make sure you go that extra mile or those small things to go ahead and reach out to that listing agent to see how we can make the deal happen. And I know we're focusing on that, but I think that's huge in this day and age in this market.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing too for buyers is make sure you are doing your investigation thoroughly on the comps, right? When you're advising a buyer to write a certain price or saying, hey, this is where we should come in at, we can't just look at the sold comps, right? We need to be looking at what's active and what's pending right now. And we need to call those agents and really find out what the activity has been like. Because the comp that sold a month ago, well, that property was listed a month prior to that, right?
60-day old.
And that's a 60-day-old comp. And today, that's different, right? Just within the last few weeks with the stock market and all that, it's a different market now, right? So if you're not calling, the agent who has an active listing, in the neighborhood, or who has a listing that's pending and finding out how many offers they got, what the activity was like, you could be advising your client the wrong way to pay more money than they should be paying.
And again, and I wouldn't, and it's good that you brought that up, because I wouldn't just rely, because a lot of times, we'll rely on actually the listing agent giving us that information.
Yeah.
But I think as a buyer agent, you may need to educate that listing agent as well by calling the active and the pending, right? And getting that feedback and saying, hey, listen, I know you listed it here. I know you guys are expecting this, but I just spoke with these 3 other, listings and pendings, and this is the feedback that we're receiving.
Yeah.
So you may want to reach out to them as well, so you can set the right expectation for your seller.
Yeah.
So again, you're doing the work, but you're also coaching. Sometimes you got to coach and walk the listing agent through that process.
Yeah, that's true, right? Because if you tell them, hey, like that property down the street is actually going to close escrow next week at this price.
Yeah.
Now maybe you have some leverage there when you're trying to negotiate for your buyer, right? But if you don't make those calls and you don't do that homework and you just look at just the sold comp and say, all right, let's offer this, you're going in pretty blind.
The data only says so much, right? The data that we see it's extremely important.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, but I think if you want the real life data, you got to make those calls.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, another challenge that we're seeing, right? We talked about this at our sales meeting, is buyers being more selective right now, right? Because there's more inventory right now, more to choose from. Buyers want to go see 10, 20 houses, right, before they put an offer on one.
Yeah.
How are we coaching our agents on how to get them to move forward? Right?
Yeah.
What's some of the strategies,
Yeah,
right?
I think one of the main strategies that I like that we use is, we sit down when we do the consultation with our buyer, and, husband, wife, we want to make sure that we're on the same page. And what I mean by that is we want to make sure we understand like their top 7 must-haves, right?
Yeah.
And getting very clear with that. Because once you do that, once you understand what the wife wants, what the husband likes, and you put that together, now you can identify the correct properties. And then when you see those properties, you can go ahead and kind of inch them along to go ahead and see if they want to write an offer.
Yeah, and you can also deter them from a property that maybe they send you, hey, Enrique, I want to go take a look at this one. They send me the link. And then since I did a consultation with them, right, and I know their must-haves, I can say, hey, John, that one actually backs up to the freeway. I'm not sure if you noticed that.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, okay, well, let's not go see that one.
There you go. And you just saved everybody time right there.
Saved everybody time, right? So you as the buyer agent, it's your job to understand their needs. And if you're not doing a buyer consultation, you're making a huge mistake, right? That's number one.
Yeah.
You got to do a thorough buyer consultation, and you got to do a thorough needs analysis where you're getting their must-haves. And if there's husband and wife, 90% of the time, they're on different pages, right?
Yeah, they can be.
Wife may want something, husband wants something, right? And so you get a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle and say, husband, what are your top 10 must-haves or top 5?
Yeah.
Wife, what are your top 5? And then see which ones are the same.
Yeah,
and
see
circle
which
those.
ones are non-negotiable.
And see which ones are non-negotiable,
because they may
right?
have certain non-negotiables, and then that'll save you so much time and energy. And the other thing you don't want to do, because if you do that, you'll avoid the buyer fatigue.
Yeah.
You'll avoid the buyer from getting burnt out from seeing too many properties.
Yep.
Right. So I think that's a great exercise, which I definitely, we've implemented, but I think, again, we still got to remind our agents to do that.
Yeah,
as well.
and remind the buyers, like, hey, there is something called buyer fatigue.
Yeah.
If we look at too many properties, sometimes they all start to look the same. You start to forget. And if you're always just chasing the next one that just popped up on the market, we may never end up buying a home.
Yeah.
And we may miss a really good opportunity to get the home that checked off all your
Yes.
boxes. And you could already start moving in and start building some equity, right? So it's your job to lead the buyers.
There you go.
Right? And do that exercise, get really clear on what they want, and then now keep them in line,
Yeah.
right? And remind them, hey, I want to make sure this is still the criteria, right?
And if it changes, well, then let's make that change.
Yeah, if
right?
it changes, okay, well, great. So now are we adding this other element,
Exactly.
right? I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, right? We're looking at 3 bedrooms now.
Yeah.
Right? We were only looking at 4 before, but now you're open to
Now
a
we're
3.
considering, yeah.
Well, no, we're not. We don't want a 3. Okay, well, then let's just scratch this property
yeah.
off the list, right? You have to have that type of conversation, and they're going to see that you're really trying to help them get what they want.
Yeah,
Right?
and I think they really appreciate that. It's not a lot of work. It's a little bit of work that's needed to be done up front before you say, hey, let's go look at homes.
Yeah.
Right? No, it's really getting really specific on what their needs and wants are.
Yeah.
And they will appreciate that.
Yeah.
They really will appreciate that. And you sharing with them after each property, well, hey, let's bring out that list now.
Yeah.
Let's see, did it hit these top 5? Okay,
Yeah.
no, it did. It only hit these 2. Okay, well, this is the one. Let's move on to the next.
Yeah, and something we do with our buyers too, and that's even effective now, is we have a grading system, right? So after we go look at a home, it's like, okay, how do we rate this home on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 or whatever?
Yeah.
Right? And making sure they're giving you feedback. Okay, we're giving this one out of 1 to 5, we're giving this one a 3. Okay, well, why was it a 3? What
Yeah.
would have made it a 4? What would have
Yeah.
made it a 5, right? Getting that feedback on every property and having them tell you and you put it in front of them, that helps you get to the property that they want a lot faster,
Absolutely.
right? Instead of just
Yeah.
wasting time looking at a bunch of homes, not really,
Going all the way to Los Banos and going all the way to Tracy and going,
Hayward
yeah,
and
yeah,
everywhere.
no, you want to bring them to the, exactly what their wants and needs are. And we've seen it. We've seen
Yeah.
it by coaching agents. We've seen this, and it's a big mistake because it burns out the agent, it burns out the buyers,
Yeah.
and then there's no deal to happen. Right?
And then what happens is you've looked at so many homes and the buyer's kind of frustrated, and then you get that text message, I think we're going to put things on pause right now.
Yeah.
All right? That could have been avoided if you would just take some of this advice and make that part of how you do business when it comes to buyers. Okay, we gave you a lot on buyers, right?
Yeah.
Now let's hit it with sellers right now, right?
Let's do it.
That's a whole nother animal. Right now we have like 10 active listings, like 14 listings coming on the market. And so what I'm telling the agents in this last meeting is like, hey guys, if you're taking listings today,
Yeah.
number one, you got to set the right expectations.
And we
with your
don't take
sellers.
listings just to take listings.
We don't just sign listings to sign them, right?
Right. I think that's important to first start that out. Like we're
Yeah.
not just here to sign listings. We're here to help people sell their property.
Sell their property, exactly, right? We want to make sure it gets sold. So, number one is the expectations need to be set, especially in this market, right?
Yeah.
Where it's kind of up and down. That 60-day old comp maybe isn't the best comp anymore. The pending comp is
Yeah.
really what's going to tell the buyer what's happening. And so I think a huge mistake you're going to make with sellers right now is you're signing listings and you're going off of comps that are old, right? And you're giving them the wrong expectations on what the price can be.
Yeah.
Right?
And what you should be doing, right, if you're going on a listing appointment, is you need to be contacting the pending, right, the ones that are pending right now,
Yeah.
right? And you need to reach out to that listing agent to see what type of activity is happened on that particular
Yeah.
property. So that's the feedback you can give your potential seller.
Yeah, even the actives, right?
Yeah.
Like you can see, okay, there's 3 other actives, and this is where they're priced at, but they're not moving,
Yeah.
right? So that you got to call those agents and see, well, what's going on, right? Hey, do you guys think that you're going to do a price reduction?
Yeah.
That's information I'm taking on my listing appointment.
Because a lot of sellers, what they're doing is they're looking on Zillow, they're looking on Redfin, and they're saying, well, hey, this property's listed at this amount, right? Or this property's sold at this amount, right? But again, that's why it's important for you as an agent to reach out to the pending and the active. So you say, yeah, it is listed here, but I spoke with that agent. They're about to go ahead and do a price reduction.
Yeah,
Right? 'Cause
absolutely.
they're not getting any activity.
Exactly. So what I would be telling sellers, right off the bat is, hey, look, at my job is to be transparent with you.
Mm-hmm.
My job is to not tell you,
wanna
best case scenario and what you want to hear. I want to give you a dose of reality, right? And see if we can still make the deal work. And if it goes for more than that, well, that's gravy, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna love me at that point.
Yeah.
But that peak price that you saw last year, the year before, it's probably not there anymore, right? And if there's a range of prices in this neighborhood, let's look at the low end range and let's run the numbers on that, right? And you need to be running net sheets with your sellers, right? And showing them this is how much you could walk away with on the low end. Can you make the deal work at that price?
Does it still make sense for you to sell if we got this low end price? Obviously, we're going to shoot for this high end, but we want to make sure that this low end can still get you to the next stage in your life.
Yep,
right?
Exactly, right? Because the worst thing you want to do is give the seller an idea that the home was going to sell for more because you were just trying to get that listing, and we see it happen all the time. You take an overpriced listing because you didn't do your homework, right? Now you do all this work to get the home ready, get it on the market, open houses, you spend money on marketing, and then they don't get their price, and then they're like, hey, we're not going to move forward. We're pulling it off the market.
And one, like you said, you spent the money, right, for the marketing, whatever that may be, but the main thing is you also spend a lot of time. And I think that's a big cost for an agent right now is the time, right? Yeah. And I think you even said something, in our meeting where, like, if you have a seller that expectation is too high, then we may not want to take that on, right? If we don't think we can accomplish what they're looking for, or if it's not it's not in that area, then we may not want to we may want to pass on that.
Yeah.
Even though we could assign the listing, but then again, we would have been spending our time and resources on something that's possibly not going to happen.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. The other thing, that's good that you touched on that, right? Because I think the conversation needs to be had, right? Like, if you have the conversation, you're like, hey, I think it's going to, let's look at the low end, right? But seller's like, well, I want to price it up here. It's fine. You could say, hey, let's make an agreement, right? We'll price it there. Yeah. And we're going to give it a timeline, a deadline, right? If within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we're not getting activity, we're lowering the price. Yeah. I've taken listings like that where I've gotten buy-in, like, hey, I'm all for trying to get more. Yeah. Right? But if that's not working in 2 or 3 weeks, we're dropping the price. Yeah. And I even put that in writing, right? Sometimes, or I even get the handshake. Yeah. Hey, are we on the same page? Yeah. Right?
Because it makes it easier when you have to have that conversation.
Exactly, right? Is, right? And then it leads to the next part is you need to over communicate with your sellers right now.
I like that.
Right?
I like that.
Over communicate because the market is a little up and down, and certain neighborhoods are doing different things. Yeah. And so that's where you need to give them feedback in real time, right? If you have someone show the property, call that agent. Hey, what'd you guys think about the property?
Yeah, what'd your buyer think about it?
What'd your buyers think about it? Are they wanting to write an offer? What do they think about the price, the condition? Get that feedback and immediately give it to your seller.
I think that's important. Right? I think that is extremely important because a lot of times agents are not doing that. Yeah. Right? And explain why. Why is that important, Enrique?
It's important because if the seller doesn't know what's happening in real time and then the home is not selling and now you're telling them to lower their price, they're going to blame you. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Right, but if you're showing them in real time and you're giving them feedback, or you're getting what I do is I like to text the agent so that they can text me back, and I screenshot it and I send it to my seller. Hey, I wanted to give you some feedback. Here's a text message from the agent on what her buyer thought.
I love it.
Now it's not coming from me. Let's say the buyer didn't like the property or the buyer had negative things to say. I'm not the bad guy.
No, you're just delivering the information.
I'm delivering the information, right? And my seller sees that. And then I can say, hey, let's jump on a call and talk about this.
Yeah, let's see how we can remedy it.
See how we can remedy this, right? Hey, there's a couple things that got pointed out. I think we should jump on a call and see how we can avoid this next time, right? That is keeping the seller up to date. So now the seller knows like they're with you and you're with them every step of the way. Yeah. So when it's time to have that conversation of like, hey, we need to adjust the price now, or hey, we may need to now invest into doing some more to the marketing. Yeah. That I know you didn't want to paint the property, but I think we need to paint the property. Yeah.
Now, yeah.
Right.
We need to. Yeah.
It's a lot easier to have that conversation, and they're going to be more willing to do that because you've kept them in communication the whole entire time, right?
Yeah, and kind of to touch on something that you know in regards to stats, right? You brought up a stat earlier where that within the last month there's 300 price reductions. Yeah. Right, and so kind of speak.
Oh, that was within the last 2 weeks, just here in Santa Clara County.
2 weeks.
In the last 2 weeks, over 300 price reductions.
Wow.
I'm sharing that with my sellers. Yeah, right.
That's what I wanted to go with. That's the information. So how would you leverage that with your sellers?
By giving them a market update. Yeah. Right. Hey guys, our property's on the market. I want to keep you up to date with what's happening in the market locally, right? So I'm doing these content videos,
Yeah,
right?
obviously,
you know,
yeah.
we do these for our sellers, our clients as well, and they get these videos also with market updates, right? Or I'm giving them an update every single week on their property, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you make that a practice in your business where every Friday you get an update on the activity with your home and then the activity in the neighborhood and maybe the activity within that zip code or something,
like that.
right?
I like that.
And it's a standard templated email where you just plug in a couple stats and feedback, and now like they're in the loop. You could maybe even have your assistant do that.
Because
right?
that's huge. I mean, communication, you got to understand, for a seller, this is their biggest asset, right? So, I mean, if you can give them, you know, over communicate with them, you know, and they, like you said, now they understand that you're on board with them. You're trying to make this transaction happen. And if you need to make adjustments, they understand why.
Exactly.
Right? It's not just all throwing them at once and now you're asking for a price reduction. No, we've been working this for the last 2-3 weeks. This is the feedback we've been receiving. This is what's happening in your zip code. This is what's happening in Santa Clara County. Now we need to make adjustments so we can be competitive.
Yeah, because people's feelings get involved, right? Like if a seller thinks something and that starts to, you know, eat at them, now it becomes a feeling, right? But stats and updates are going to counteract those feelings, right? When you're giving them a text message screenshot from the buyer agent, or you're giving them the stats, the numbers don't lie, and you can't make that stuff up, right?
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier for them to come down to reality when you're showing them instead of just telling them, right?
Absolutely.
And you need to make that a practice in your business in any given market, but especially right now, where you're not just throwing a home on the market and it's selling in 1 week, right? That's not the case for all homes. Some homes, you know, depending on the neighborhood.
There might be.
But what we're seeing, you know, I talked to my buddy yesterday. He's like, man, I got a bunch of listings. They're not moving, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, yeah, we got some too. And like, we got a few that moved pretty fast. And then I got a few that are sitting too, you know.
And I think, you know, I think one thing we have to understand is that listing agents and sellers have been a little spoiled because things are selling within, you know, 5, 6, 7 days.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, sometimes it does take a little longer. And other markets, it's, you know, it does take 25, 30 days to sell a property, right, to get in contract. So I think that's also, you know, we got to kind of relay that back that things have changed, or there may be a few weeks more before we get in contract.
Yeah.
Just setting that right expectation.
And here's another one, and we'll maybe end with this one. I know this is a lot of stuff, but I saw a huge mistake on a listing that I have right now that's going pending. It's in Fremont. It's a townhouse and it's in a community. And it goes back to, there was a competing comp that was on the market before we put ours on. They put it on the market and like 2 weeks later, they dropped their price dramatically, right? Because the seller or the agent probably got impatient, right? Even though like it's probably expected, you know, if I looked at the days on market, it's gonna take a few weeks to sell. But within a week or two, or I think it was like 10 days, they did like a $50,000 price reduction.
Within 10 days. Okay.
Yeah, right? And that was a huge mistake, right? Because now they ended up getting an offer and it was even less
than the 50,000 reduction.
And now that drove all the comps down.
Wow.
Dramatically, right? And that happened while we were prepping our home for sale. So now when we go to put our home for sale, that is now the most recent comp.
Yeah.
Right? Which ended up costing us money, right?
Yeah.
Luckily, I was able to negotiate, and our property was a little bit nicer.
Yeah.
It was same size, but ours had, you know, some better upgrades, and I was probably a better negotiator. I was able to still bring the price up substantially higher, but we probably lost maybe $30,000 of what we could have gotten if that seller and agent would have just stayed put.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but we don't know what their situation was.
We don't know what their situation was, right? But what I'm trying to get at is, don't make drastic moves prematurely, right? Like you got to be patient as well. If things are taking a little bit longer to sell, some people have never been in that market, right? You need to know that, and you need to prep the seller. Like, hey, look, we're not going to do anything for 21 days or 30 days.
We're gonna.
This is our plan. We're going to go in there because we don't want to just lower the price. All of a sudden, someone comes in lower, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to let this ride out. Let's give it enough time to get exposure.
Yeah.
If something's not working by that time, then we can make an adjustment. But making an adjustment prematurely, they just cost their seller a lot of money, and then that ends up trickling over to our comp, to our property, right? Which wasn't the best case scenario, right? And so I think it just goes back to, we got to be patient right now. We got to know what's going on, and we got to readjust that.
And I think the other part is, like you said, put together a plan, right? And I think that's huge. Is that when you're doing your listing presentation, you're saying, hey, we're going to start here, and if we're not, hey, we're going to stay here, and if we need to make an adjustment, we're going to make that adjustment maybe in the 14 days or 21 days.
Exactly.
Right? And I think that's a big thing. Is one, obviously the transparency and the communication, but then also laying out a plan. Don't just wing it.
Yeah.
Right. Don't wing it on a $2 million asset. Like, let's actually put together a plan to say, hey, if it doesn't move, well, these are the adjustments we're going to need to do. Whether we need to paint the property, whether we're going to look at the feedback from the potential buyers, or if we're going to have to do a reduction in price.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So I think we gave you guys a lot, right?
Yeah.
Just know though, in closing, right, that the market is gonna change, and in different markets, you got to use different tools.
Yeah.
You got to have different expectations that you're setting with your clients, and I think especially today, with just the state of the economy and things happening that are outside of real estate, it's being affected by the stock market and all that. It's important that you learn this stuff, right, and you implement this stuff and you practice it.
And I think it's important, Enrique, to add that if you're an agent, you want to make sure that you're participating in sales meetings, in masterminds, so that there's only so much you can see on your own. And again, participate in those things. Make sure that you're actually reaching out to the listing agent, to the properties that are pending, properties that are active, right? That's where you're going to learn and get the most value that you can provide. You can provide that value to your potential buyers or sellers.
And good point, right, about participating in sales meetings, masterminds, and all that, because if you're only selling a handful of homes a year, and you're trying to build that up, you only have a handful of experience per year, right?
Yeah.
But when you start masterminding with other agents who have been doing a lot more sales, they have a lot more data, right?
Yes.
They have a lot more trends. They have a lot more experience because they've been in a lot more battles. That's why it's important to still show up to training, to still show up to your team meetings, your office meetings, your market updates and all that stuff, so that you can use that information when you're out there in the field, right? Yeah. So great point there. Guys, I hope this information was valuable. If you need anything, have any questions, or even have any topics you want us to cover on our next video, reach out to us and we'll help you out.
Yeah, sounds good.
Talk soon.